let's watch Whatifalthist. One of my favorite content creators. Whatifalthist has truly become a favorite content creator of mine. His stuff is so not only so creative but also so correct. Doesn't mean that I always agree with what he has to say, but I think he just says a lot of stuff that's at the very least very smart.
Ever since the Ukraine crisis, people have been asking me what the chances are that this war escalates into something bigger. The
None.
world's been stuck in a fever pitch of worrying if the war to end all wars will happen in our time. This video will be a
Don't think
breakdown on
so.
my part
I
of
really
what are the
don't think
chances
so.
that we could get the next world war. If a war were to break out as well, how bad would it get? The answers may unalterably change our lives.
What
I'm
he
Rudyard,
thinks.
the guy behind Whatifalthist, and one thing that
Oh,
doesn't
my
change is our need
man.
for comfort and space, and practical use that we've always had. That's why this video is sponsored by Extra, the world's
He
largest.
does look like a Viking though. He probably has some like look, he's probably like either English or German or Northern European for sure.
I mean, cars is a push-backing device. They're always a device for months. They're fantastic.
That looks like a cool
Now for
wallet
my
though.
viewers, Extra, so you can get a wallet.
Causes of war. Let me just get my phone.
Given that this is a politics and history channel, I've
Look at all of his videos. The crisis of the 21st century. Is China the next world power? 6 countries that will be superpowers by 2080. 5 countries that will collapse by 2040. Is America crazy now? So he
covered the
talks a
potential
lot
for
about
future wars in great
yeah, a
detail
lot
in
of
other
future
videos.
wars.
I'm just going to briefly summarize the factors I've talked about before here
Water.
to create a picture of what could be driving the world
Definitely one
towards
of 'em.
war. The best way to describe it is that the world is in a constant struggle between the world as it really exists and the institutions humans make to manage it. The problem we run into is that the institutions we use to manage our world were largely created at the end of World War II, while the world we live in has changed a tremendous amount since then. Wars are natural to human history and the world order. You can repress them and the
Yep.
necessary changes to the world order that come with them, but they have to come out at some point. The easiest trend to look at, and the one I've talked about the most ad nauseum before on this show, but
I don't know. I mean, I don't like the idea of war. I honestly wouldn't fight for my country, you know? Like, I wouldn't fight for Mexico. Like, fuck Mexico, dude. Someone come and invade here. Like, I fucking hate it. But it's just a horrible, like, just the thought of fighting a war. It's pretty horrific.
only since it's the most pertinent factor in world today, is that due to globalization, we're seeing a remarkable amount of competition over the world order that's gradually breaking it. There's a reason that there are riots and dissatisfaction in France, India, China, America, or Canada now. The underlying world system isn't working for anyone anymore. The shortest explanation is that American or French workers are being undercut by Bulgarians and Mexicans, who in turn are undercut by Chinese, who are undercut by Indonesians and Bangladeshis.
Well, thank you for that.
The world's population
I
has
appreciate
exploded by a
that.
factor of 4 since World War II, and the amount of areas competing in the globalized economy means that everyone everywhere is on their toes trying to survive, being potentially undercut by
I can't
someone
read.
else. The whole world system's in a rat race to the bottom. Nations become aggressive as their societies fall apart and become desperate. This isn't new across history. You can actually look at a series of French Revolution, the crisis of the 17th century, and the Black Death.
War of the
All the
Roses,
metrics
100
line
Years
up
War.
for today. This means that the chances are extremely high we see a crisis that breaks across the world system in the decades to come. In all the previous crises, we've seen wars between the great powers, whether the Napoleonic, 30 Years' War, and 100 Years' War. However, a couple things are also making the war more worrying in the years to come. I've covered these factors in my Wars of the 2020s.
This video is pretty good.
The first is water wars. The world is getting drier due to global warming, and in lots of areas with declining water systems at the same time as coming off an era of massive population growth. Nations are trying to grab water for geostrategic reasons, with Turkey damming up rivers flowing into Iraq, China,
Hey,
rivers
brother.
flowing that
Everything's
make
good.
up
How are you
20% of
doing?
India's water supply, and similar problems in Central Asia. For a lot of countries involved, the water is necessary for their survival as nations. India, a nation with a restless and overpopulated farmer population, is already struggling with water as is, and is the area I'm most worried about. The third factor is aging, in which populations are collapsing around the world due to low birth rates.
Yeah,
China,
this is
Germany,
another
Japan,
one that's an issue that nobody's talking about. We talk a lot about, maybe not 100% nowadays, but even a few years ago, people talk about, how our planet is overpopulated. But nobody really seems to talk about the aging population, especially what you guys are facing in Europe. I mean, it's almost kind of scary to think about because it's a problem that's very hard to
and
fix.
Russia's populations are projected to have over the
So
next
yeah, this
70.
one's are the fucking worst. The one about water, that's probably the scariest of them all. Imagine having a war because of water. That's fucking scary, dude. That and of course aging, which
Years.
again
The
something
effects
that
are
can't
worse
be
than
really
anywhere in
solved.
Eastern Europe. Aging of this degree is unprecedented and will murder nations' economies as the elderly take up more money to support them, which leaves decreasing amounts of
We have good natality in France. That's true though, but a lot of it does depend on immigrants, doesn't it?
young with less and less. This creates a death spiral. The reason Russia and China are being so aggressive right now is to raid against the dying light before their societies fall apart due
Yep.
to aging. Finally, the balance of power and social systems that were created at the end of the
Oh,
Second
this
World
one, this
War,
one
whether
is
the
this one
American
sucks.
guarantorship of the world order, the US dollar hegemony, the managerial
Yeah, I mean the fact that America is gonna decline as a world power, that's also pretty bad. Like, hey, listen, I'm Mexican, all right? It's not like we're gonna have some effect over this because we're always gonna be their neighbors. But for countries in Africa, for example, that lack of American influence is gonna come combated with more Chinese influence. So and Russia in Europe, like we are seeing today. So this is also not one that's great. A lot of people love to criticize America and how much of a bad nation it is, but in reality, it's a pretty good country, especially when you compare it to other historical superpowers.
bureaucratic economic system, the
So
technocratic
this one
social
is gonna
order,
be
the
is gonna
United
have a
Nations,
nice
and in much of the third world, the nation itself cannot survive the
ending. I don't
pressures
know.
that a new world is putting upon them. We're seeing old orders fray and be crushed under the weight of the new world order.
Yeah.
The best example of this is China's threatening of America as the dominant world power, which creates the condition called Thucydides' trap, where America is incentivized to crush China before China.
Okay, ruling power: Portugal, Spain, France, the Habsburgs, the Ottoman, the Habsburgs, the Swedish, the Dutch Republic, England, France, Great Britain, UK, France, UK and France, Russia, France, Germany, China and Russia, Japan. Okay, so this actually like a pretty interesting table. And the last we had is the US and the Soviet Union and the UK and France in the
becomes more powerful
1990s.
than America. The historian Barbara Tuchman
Oh, 1.8 for non-immigrants. I mean, that's better than like other countries in Europe, but that's still below the replacement rate. So I don't know.
described the world before
Oh,
World War I as buzzing with
damn.
chaotic energy that led to
What times are
war
we
due
living
to
in?
industrialization being so destabilizing, and I think we see the same energy now, with the massive pain caused by the rise of the internet, which whips societies into a frenzy where stuff like canceling and mass hatred's okay. I think it's very telling how a majority of chattering class Americans support a US war over Ukraine since they've been so riled up by mob mentality. It's almost like the mass frenzy that took place before World War I. Industrial wars are so horrifying that countries don't fight them unless they're backed up against
I
the
don't
wall.
know about this.
However, the situation we're seeing is that many countries are in that very situation. Countries are willing to gamble the chances of dying gloriously if they're afraid they're going to die anyway. When people ask me what the world would be like if World War I never happened, I reply that never could have happened. The world order was so
Yeah.
fundamentally tilted towards war that if war didn't start with the murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, it would have started somewhere else.
Oh yeah.
In the decades leading up to World War I, you saw
Autobahn Bismarck. One day the great European war will come out of some damn foolish thing in the Balkans. 1888. Wow. Autobahn Bismarck. Quite a smart guy, I think. Well, at least quite famous. I don't know much about him. Can I recommend a channel for you to check out? Sure, man. Probably be checking it not now but on next stream, but I definitely take a lot of notes from you guys, and I've a lot, most of these channels, including this one, Whatifalthist, I've learned because of you. Britain has hundreds of nukes too. Yeah, they could level down St. Petersburg and Moscow easily.
Morocco, the
That's cool,
Congo,
though.
and a few other places. Every time the great powers were able to paper the problem over. But when the world order was that unstable, war had to happen at some point. The world's nowhere near as unstable as it was before World War I,
Oh, yeah,
thank
for
God.
sure.
But we have a similar crisis where we see lots of powder kegs connected around the world waiting for matches to drop on
Okay,
them.
so the U.S. proper, we've got Canada, Mexico, Panama, Costa Rica, Brazil, Argentina, Chile as American allies. Most of Europe, most of the Middle East, surprisingly, the United Arab Emirates, my hopefully soon to be home, is not really in red or blue. Chinese allies, and yeah,
We've seen greater war nearly break out many times over the last 2 years, with flashpoints in North Korea, Taiwan, between India and China over Iran, Turkey, and Ukraine.
political
Every time the great powers have
hotspots.
been able to paper things over. However, what happens if we have a major recession that crushes the standard of living or mass riots start breaking out in China? We've already seen the world drift into madness. We've lived through things that our parents in their youth would have viewed as science fiction. Mushy as it
Yeah,
sounds, I remember Carl Jung describing the vibe in Europe before the First World War as a palpable frenzy of energy and fear that intoxicated the continent for years before war broke out. The continent
wow.
got drunk before it fell into barbarism. I think I know that feeling since we're experiencing it today.
Why we might
Much as I
not
painted a
have
horrible and
war.
lurid picture of how we might be
Yeah,
able to dance to our graves, I think
especially what you Thomas said about Russia and the UK threatening each other. Pretty scary though. Uh, how, bro? I'm gonna come back in 30 minutes for sure, bro. We're waiting. Napoleon the Third better than Bismarck. I will not elaborate. Oh shit.
20th century were. The first major point to get across is that we're used to assuming total wars or epic struggles that are waged by entire nations with their whole energies are normal across history. Well, they're really not. We only have two eras of total wars across history: the early industrial era from the Napoleonic to World War II, and the 3rd century BC. For the rest of history, you had big wars, but I wouldn't call them total wars. Look at the Hundred Years' War, 30 Years' Wars. These were horrible wars that
Oof.
killed millions of people, but they went
Yeah.
on for decades, with their countries functioning while World War I broke Europe in a 4-year period. The difference was that the military
Oh, I remember
technology
this
of the
photo. Yeah.
times meant that war wasn't all or nothing, and so the way you won wars was by trying to get the other side to go bankrupt by dragging out the war as long as possible and hurting their economy
That's true though.
indirectly. Large set-piece battles were pretty rare in these wars, with skirmishes and sieges being the most common. The problem we run into with predicting the future of war is that everyone is always wrong. I'm not messing around. Often the smartest people in the world try to predict what will happen in the next war, only to be magnificently wrong. Humorously,
Chamberlain.
I think the best strategy might actually be just to predict the opposite of what
How do you
everyone else
pronounce
is
it?
doing to get it right. I'm
Chamberlain?
kind of stuck
Neville
between if the next war
Chamberlain.
will
I
be
don't know.
unimaginably horrifying due to advanced technology, or if technology is descaled war to make it less intensive. It's really impossible to know. The conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East make it look like war has become less intensive, but in both cases, it's militaries that aren't very effective. When we've seen the crack US Army fight in conflicts like Iraq, it's been able to blow conventional opponents out of the water with blitzkrieg precision. A couple factors determine the nature of the next war. The first is how aggressive
China.
and or effective China is. Ukraine was really interesting to see since I had
Thank
seen
you for your
reports both saying the
recommendation.
Russians had modernized their military and made it incredibly effective, and those that said their military would be terrible. It's interesting to see that the actual Russian military, as it fielded, undershot expectations.
Yeah.
China's very
Oh,
similar,
yeah.
and I've heard reports that the Chinese either will be extremely capable and aggressive in a conflict,
Or they would just
corrupt and
flop
disaffected.
tremendously.
The Russian weakness in Ukraine, a conflict I expected the Russians to win in 2 weeks, is a load off one of my paranoid fantasies that the Russians and Chinese deal to coordinate a two-front war over Eurasia. With the Russians no longer being a viable threat to NATO
Yeah.
and Europe, that leaves the Chinese alone in the East. In a scenario where the Chinese are a real threat, things get scary. China's 4 times America's population and the largest industrial output of any nation in the world. If they fight well, they'll be unstoppable.
Yeah.
However, the other scenario is that China's not unified and isn't effective. In a world like this, China just collapses into civil war without waging an external war.
The
I
thing
think this-
about China that I think a lot of people don't consider is Chinese stability depends on their economic prosperity. You know, there's a communist party that's very authoritarian in China. So in reality, to keep people sort of happy, you need to give them that economic prosperity. So are they gonna risk it all? Or is the Communist Party is gonna risk it all just to like go to war with Taiwan just to get like a tiny island that yeah, I get it, it's important and it's very symbolic for them, but is that worth it? Is it worth helping Russia fight some sort of like two-front war in Eurasia, but give up that economic stability? Let's not forget, China's exports go primarily to the US and the European Union. If they cut that out, China is going down real quick. Sure, like now, America is going to take a hit as well. Europe is going to take a hit as well. But I don't think the Chinese want to risk it. I think the Chinese government is a lot more business focused in the sense that, as long as they keep getting money, they're gonna be all right. But their population is aging, and that is the scary thought. Are they gonna do something crazy before their population starts to age very quickly? Who knows? But I'm interested to know. Uh, Taiwan is really important because of computer chips and naval routes. Well, you're right. It's a very difficult decision, isn't it?
Scenario is pretty likely and shouldn't be discounted. China just collapses into riots and rebellions as the government falls
Real life
apart.
lore made a
If
video on
China falls
Taiwan
to
a few
internal
weeks ago.
problems and doesn't
I
reform as a
watch it?
powerful
I don't think so.
totalitarian
Did I?
state, there's no way we have a major war. The free world would have a series of internal social problems, but they're manageable. However, the Chinese are a proud people, and I partially have trouble imagining them go out quietly. There are two important mitigating variables that make a legitimate world war
Nukes?
less likely. The first being nuclear weapons. Although I think a conventional war could still happen with countries having nuclear weapons in the same way that poison gas was never used in World War II, I think even having them on the table makes world leaders think more carefully about starting major wars.
Oh, yeah.
This is a
Absolutely.
huge factor that needs to be emphasized, but it's really impossible to know how huge a factor it is. The second is that major wars normally happen when there's lots of young people. This is the case for the Napoleonic and World Wars. Most nations today have collapsing youth populations that make war very socially costly. Although I think a world war could easily happen, I don't think it's the most likely option due to these factors.
What war would look like?
When you're predicting the future, you're looking at different die roll chances. I think there's a small chance that
Okay, definitely won't invade Taiwan unless they get nukes or something. They'd lose basically their semiconductors, some trade embargoes, and lose hundreds of thousands of working age men in the process of getting nukes, not if they already have nukes. Oh shit, well, I think China has nukes, so
nothing goes wrong at all. The
definitely
old
not
world
a
order has been
pretty
building up
thought.
to release, and it has to go somewhere. Likewise, I think the chances of an old-style World War II conflict
it's-
are there, but they're in the minority.
They're
I think
it's
the most
unlikely,
likely
yeah.
option is a conflict like the 30 Years' War. For those that don't know, the 30 Years' War was a conflict fought between basically every country in Europe from 1618 to 1648. This was caused by one of those social collapses I talked about earlier in the video, as practically every nation in Europe waged a war to keep their local social system intact, while also fighting a war with foreign powers. However, due to the underlying issues and stresses of the war, basically every country was fighting a civil war by the end of the conflict. The thing I find compelling at the 30 Years' War is that it's a model that allows a reset in the world system, while I think a world war model doesn't perfectly fit for the present. What seems more in keeping with the spirit of our
My boy
times?
Johan Hus.
The world wars were
Hus.
fought on the tails of large, earnest young populations mobilized by the recent Industrial Revolution, and I just don't see those factors being there today. In the 30 Years' War, nations fought through proxy by funding allies waging economic war with the others, trying to destroy other countries' societies, while nations themselves were torn by massive class, ideological, political, and social divisions.
The Holy
much
Roman
like today.
Empire, dude.
If
What
we're
a
using the
mess.
30 Years' War as a proxy for a future conflict, it would look like this. Again, the chances of anything you can think of imagining
It's
are pretty
unlikely,
low,
yeah.
and the chances of something you can't even imagine happening are the highest. But this is a potential scenario that might not even be the most likely scenario, but I think it's a compelling vision for
People
what
said the
could
same
happen.
about Russia and Ukraine,
Russia
though.
conquers
True.
Ukraine after a nasty 3-month conflict. China, realizing the time is soon, invades Taiwan while the world is busy looking at Europe. America doesn't directly want to start a conflict with China, so blockades China of oil and all trade through the Straits of Malacca. China cannot survive as a nation without ocean-bearing trade, and so the Chinese attacked U.S. allies like Vietnam and eventually India. The Chinese support North Korean invasion of South Korea. The Chinese get assurances of a Russian invasion
Yeah.
of Eastern Europe and NATO, which does not occur. Putin would like to see the Chinese and Americans fight each other to weakness. The conflict isn't a total war. It's a limited one with armies numbering in the millions, but no draft. The advantage lies with the infantry in this conflict, and the Chinese don't fight super effectively, so their armies get bogged down upon attacking their opponents. There are immense social pressures to draft, but all sides are worrying instituting a draft would result in revolts. Countries use social media to pump out lots of propaganda. The internet goes into a war frenzy, and
Yeah,
normal people,
a draft wouldn't be a popular thing for sure. So definitely, there's
including
probably not going to
yourself,
be a
have
draft.
been
I'm
misled
pretty
to believe
confident
that the war
about
is
that.
totally justified and necessary. America doesn't technically declare war on China per se, but millions of Americans are fighting in Asia with American allies.
India,
the great powers have
Indonesia.
agreements not to use nukes in case there are no bombings on countries proper. Countries instead use cyber and economic attacks. The Chinese pull out of the dollar system, which results in a
Ukraine is a lot easier to invade logistically, and still Russia managed to fail in logistics. True.
global
I mean,
collapse in standard of living.
Ukraine, for example, is
People
pretty
hate
flat.
the world and
There's
see
not an
that
ocean
governments use
separating
wartime
Ukraine.
laws to prevent dissent. An important factor is that we would see the breakdown of the global agricultural system. And we're seeing this today with a lot of analysts thinking we're going to have famine in much of the world by the end of this year. But the
Oh,
world agricultural
God.
system is very intertwined. And so political problems
Calorie import dependence. Gosh, please tell me Mexico is food secure. It's not. It's really not. Mexico imports 25 to 50% of its consumption. America exports 10 by and 24 and 34. So hey, uh, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, USA, Canada, please help us out. We really need you. Europe also, some parts of Europe seem to be very insecure of food. Portugal, Spain, Italy. Germany seems to be okay. France seems to be doing great. So yeah,
problems
that's
result in mass
look at
famine
Africa,
and
man.
inability to move fertilizer
This is-
around and starvation
Rip
in
Africa,
food insecure
fertilizer gets
countries.
scarcer.
And this would just get
Japan, bro.
remarkably
Oh,
terrible.
true,
if
Joe. Yo, Japan. I think we saw a video. I don't know if we saw it on stream or in a video, but there was a video of Japan by I think real life lore explaining that basically you can't grow pretty much food in Japan. You know, that's pretty bad. More than 75% of their consumption comes from abroad.
if we had a war
The
or
United
political
Arab Emirates.
disturbance. With the
Damn.
exception of the United Kingdom,
That's supposed
Eastern
to be
Europe,
my
and
new home,
Scandinavia,
bruh.
most of Europe doesn't support America in this conflict. The U.S. pulls troops out of Europe as punishment, and the financial crash
Interesting. You know, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, traditional American allies, they don't support America. While Poland, Hungary, Czechia,
hits
Slovakia,
Europe
they
hard,
do support
with
it.
radical parties and revolts across the continent. Skirmishes start between Poland and Russia that escalate into a Russian invasion of Poland that fails as Russian soldiers refuse to fight. Russia falls into revolution and civil war. China falls into civil war as the war ends. The Treaty of Tokyo solidifies the borders of the New World Order. Far-right candidates are elected into power in India and the U.S., which cause left-wing urban
Moody
revolts, which are
and
countered by right-wing
Trump, of
militias.
course.
Finally, with right-wing governments cracking down. The worst possible option is that these countries become military dictatorships. Across Eurasia, we see warlords rise to power as atrocities like genocide against ethnic minorities and conflicts that kill millions. We now end up with cascading effects. How do you predict the Vietnam or Korean wars from the death of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand? As conflict begets conflict over the decades, we start to see a new world order establish itself. Whether it's a new
Coney.
caliphate, a Chinese prophet who founds a new religion,
Whoa.
and the people who
You got to remember Coney. That was like 2012, right? I mean, pretty crazy. Mexico, U.S. allies. We got, you know, remember his video where he said he was predicting a European, sort of like an independent Canada. No, not like an independent Canada, like a broken Canada. Independent Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia, and then the prairie regions annexed by the U.S., as well as Greenland, which I think it's pretty funny, though. But hey,
so
this
much
map,
horror, we'll
maybe it's
start to
not
have
that
families
crazy.
again.
Maybe.
People will forget all the big ideas they once believed and settle down for order. The biotech industry will usher in a new revolution as the next genre of music comes from the garages of Phoenix, Arizona. Whatifalthist is often called a doomer channel since I predict what will end, but what I can't show you is what will come. If I was in 1914, I could tell you that the age of emperors, traditional religion, and big finance would end, but I wouldn't be able to tell you how jazz, feminism, communism, the movie industry, and affordable cars were all around the corner. I've started feeling nostalgic for this moment in time. I've taken moments to think about how we're in the last moments of our age. I'm savoring drinking a latte while listening to DaBaby and scrolling through Tinder in the same way that I'm sure a nobleman in 1788 savored his beef bourguignon and Rousseau while looking at his big-wigged friends, concealing an inner chuckle that the world that everyone else around him believed to be immortal
1788. That's a very interesting year. The French
passively like
Revolution
clouds
was
over
so
the
close.
mountains.
Yeah.
This all sounds pretty bad, and it might be, but I'm going to choose to be optimistic, and I look forward to being able to hopefully share this journey with all of you.
Japan's Chinese food imports were only 12% in 2013, to be fair. Okay, true. So maybe they don't depend that much on China, but still, I'm worried about the United Arab Emirates, though. If I'm going to be living there, then, bro, you better get some food from
I take
somewhere.
joy in knowing that as this happens, we as a Whatifalthist community might be able to talk,
Survive.
think, and, God willing, possibly alter
Yeah.
the events to come in our own little way. Let's get some popcorn. Whatifalthist, and thanks for watching. If you enjoyed
Wait,
to come in our own
I want to
little way.
read. Oil prices stay low. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf won't be able to support their welfare states. Oh no. Yeah, that's not great though. Thanks for that.
Let's
Okay, wait. That was pretty. My friend is Swiss. She said if a world war started, she's heading back to Switzerland. Bro, I think all of us are going back to Switzerland, are heading to Switzerland. But no, I mean, pretty scary, man. Gotta feel bad for